everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'll be showing you how I digitally draw eyes in the program MediBang Paint. There are a few different ways you can draw them, but today I'll show you how to do it in this style. To sketch out the shape, the first thing you want to do is draw a slightly curved line. Since this is a right eye, the left side should be a little more curved, and then it should lengthen or straighten out as you go towards the right. Extend the right end of the line kind of like a winged eyeliner. Next, draw little curved lines, almost like parentheses, for the iris. If you were to divide the eye into thirds, these iris lines would basically fall onto the lines dividing the eye into thirds. Don't form a full circle, just draw enough so that it's symmetrical. Then just do a quick horizontal line on the bottom. It should be basically straight with just a little bit of curve. On the left side, it'll end pretty close to where the top line ends, but on the right side, it won't. If you pretend you don't have that little extending tail on the top eye line, the bottom one should line up with the equivalent part on the left side. Then thicken the top line a little. We're just doing the sketch, not the line art, so it doesn't have to be perfect. Just add some thickness on top. Add a rough idea of where you want the lashes to be. Since this is just the sketch, I'm more focusing on the placement rather than how it looks. Focus the majority on the ends, but try not to make it too thick and concentrated in just one or two areas. Like, spread it out a little, but don't make it too even or else that looks weird. Now that the sketch is done, it's line art time. For the top line, I use this dark brown color. Do the base line with the pen brush and then build on top of that with the pencil. Then switch back to the pen brush and make sure the force fade in or out function is on. This makes it so that when you do a stroke, it kind of tapers on both ends. Darken up the top line using short strokes. Try to give it some gaps and make it not just all one straight color. The force fade tool is especially important for the lashes since it creates a more natural lash-like effect. Again, use short strokes and just, follow your line art. Turn off the fade function and just line the iris. This should be pretty simple. For the bottom eye lines, I like to use this light brown color and a pencil brush. I personally like to do it on a separate layer, just so that if you don't like it and want to erase, it doesn't interfere with your iris lines. Anyways, the pencil brush gives it a softer quality. Just kind of brush it on quickly, thickening it with a few more strokes. Then switch back to the pen brush with the force fade function on and turn the size down. Create a separate layer and just dash on some bottom eyelashes. You only need to do 4 or 5, just kind of evenly spaced out on the bottom line. I also made the color just a little lighter, but you don't always have to do that. It's kind of like personal preference. Okay, now that the line art is done, it's time to color it. I'm going to be doing a purple eye, so this is my base color. It should be on the lighter side since you're going to add darker tones on top. Fill in the iris on a layer underneath all your line art. Pick a darker shade of the same color for the pupil. Create a new layer above the base layer and select clipping. The clipping makes it so that everything on the clipped layer will only appear on the layer it's clipped to. So all of the further eye coloring will be on clipped layers on top of the base. Using a regular pen brush, but make sure the fade function is off, draw the pupil on this clipped layer and then make a new layer. Switch to an airbrush brush, make sure the opacity is not on full strength, and then just shade the top area to make it a little darker. You kind of want like a gradient-like effect. Create a new clipped layer and go back to your base color, but this time make it lighter instead of darker. Turn the layer into a hard light layer. This turns the brighter color brighter when it's layered. For this step, I like to use the hard watercolor brush with no soft edge on a low opacity. Draw a semicircle on the bottom half of the eye. You can also adjust the opacity of this with the slider bar to make sure it's not too bright. This semicircle should have a few layers, not just be one solid shape. Create a new hard light layer, turn the color lighter, and repeat the process, but this time the circle should be a little smaller, like this. For this circle, you want more of a blended effect rather than a hard edge. You can do this step two different ways. The first way is you turn a soft edge on in the watercolor brush, or you can use an airbrush. I've used both techniques in the past, but for this one, I'm using the airbrush since it tends to work a little bit better, especially when the eye is bigger. Repeat this step one more time with a lighter color and new layer. This time, you probably will want to use a hard watercolor brush with a soft edge. When you've finished with the bright parts, you should have a sort of gradient effect with it getting brighter, almost white, towards the middle bottom. If you don't like it, just remember you can always adjust the opacity with the slider bar. Next, switch to the pen brush on a force fade setting. On a new layer with the hard light effect on, draw 3 thick lines. They should be kind of coming out of the pupil, but not connected to anything. Make sure your pen size is large enough for this step. Like, the lines should be pretty thick. Turn the opacity down when you're done because you don't want them to stick out too brightly. Make yet another hard light layer. For this step, we're going to use the Light 3 brush. Using that same color as before, just brush on some little sparkle dot things. Use this sparingly, you kind of just want a dusting of it. Focus them more towards the lighter areas, like the middle, and try not to make them cross the pupil. This brush can be kind of hard to use since the dots tend to come out unpredictably, and this step will almost definitely take a few tries to get just how you want it. Once you're done with that, switch your color to just a straight white and go to the pen brush, again making sure fade is turned off. On a new layer, draw one larger oval in the upper left corner, angling it diagonally, and then draw 2 more dots going down and 2 across. These should both be circular. The further they get from the oval, the smaller they are. Do the same thing in the bottom right-hand corner, but scale the whole thing down so it's a little bit smaller. Okay, we're not quite done yet. Go back to the darker airbrush layer and create a layer on top of that in between that dark airbrush layer and the first hard light layer. Select your dark airbrush color and make it darker. Then shade around the top to make it even darker. I encourage you to repeat this a couple times on new layers with increasingly darker shades. However, as your color gets darker, make sure to keep it around the top. You want a nice gradient effect. As you shift around the darker top shading, you might also find you want to change the pupil color. This whole part is pretty intuitive, just keep fiddling around with it until it looks good. The main thing is you want enough contrast between the light, hard light, middle bottom, and the darker top. I just added some skin color around the eye on a layer underneath the colored iris. So now I'll show you guys how I do eye whites. Since this color for the skin is pretty light, I'm just using a straight white for the eye whites. But when the skin color is darker, I'll usually use a slight off-white just so it's not so glaring. Fill in the majority of the whites with, just your regular pen brush, and then using an airbrush on a relatively low opacity, make a nice little gradient to blend the skin and the eye whites. Now what I like to do is take this orangey red color. I don't really have a set color for it. I just kind of pick any random orange red. And then using that, just shade around the eye a bit with the airbrush. For the Eyelights shading, I also used a very light grayish red and kind of just brushed it on using the airbrush brush. Okay, we're all done. Hope you enjoyed the tutorial and hopefully learned something.